The illusion of wrestling being quote-unquote real is truly well dead and buried. Let's look at WWE's Netflix documentary exposing everything. However, wrestling legitimacy has always been questioned. For example, take a look at this quote from the Brooklyn Eagle, November 14th, 1877, page 2. So-called championship contests. There's probably no sport before the public, excepting professional billiard playing, in which there has been so much regular hippodroming and crookedness practiced as in the wrestling arena. Within the past 2 or 3 years, there has been scarcely an important contest in which the result has not been known beforehand. The system of humbug has been carried on in the form of creating a supposed bitter rivalry between the prominent wrestlers in order to get up an excitement. And matches have been arranged which has been alleged to be for thousands of dollars a side, when not a dollar has been put on either side. The contest has been for the gate money alone, and that is equally divided, betting deciding as to which party should win. Thus, even since the early days of pro wrestling, the legitimacy of it has been questioned. Though wrestlers would never go on record to expose the business, whether that be outright denying it, for example during this early 80s interview with Randy Savage.
Go, Bobby.
Okay, how much of wrestling is fake?
How much is... Well, that's a good question. I want to know this one myself.
0.
None at all?
Nothing.
Or the infamous David Schultz slap, where reporter John Stossel did a 2020 expose on wrestling which included Eddie Mansfield, a wrestler of minor note, who exposed the business via showing the reporter how certain moves were done or blading, aka how wrestlers draw blood, using a hidden razor blade, in which the reporter asked Schultz, is it fake? Schultz, in response, slapped in full force, aggrieved at the accusation, and more than likely the wording of it as fake. Though wrestling would be truly exposed in possibly its most controversial and famous moment, of course the Montreal Screwjob, in which WWF champion Bret Hart was screwed out into losing his title. Of course this wasn't the first time this happened in pro wrestling history, not even WWF history. However, this exposed the behind the scenes of the wrestling business. So much so, Bret Hart would go on show off the record in 1997 and he would talk about his character, exposing the difference between Bret's character and the real Bret Hart. Surprised many considering how serious Bret Hart took himself. Thus, this felt to a lot of people out of character, pardon the pun, for him to do so.
Vince McMahon and the WWF was that they seemed very much hell-bent on trying to tear my character down on his exit. And I was in a position, a very good position, to make a stand on that. Like, for example, in my contract I had what you call 30 days reasonable creative control, which is a very simple thing to just make sure that I'm protected on my way out, and they certainly didn't honor that.
Now, I don't think this killed wrestling. I think the moment that killed wrestling would occur in 2001, 1st of April. Now, there is a quote from the late great Terry Funk. They may not think wrestling is real, but I can make them believe I'm real, end quote. Which is a great line, but also pertains to maybe the biggest single wrestler in at least American history, if not the history of the business. That being Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, the impact that Steve Austin had on the business, even to this day, cannot be understated. Just financially, he saved WWF, was not single-handedly. He was the biggest draw in terms of ratings and revenue. For example, his Austin 316 shirt sold $12 million in its first year, and by 1998, according to some reports, his merch accounted for almost half of WWF merch sales. Quote from John Spong, Texas Monthly, 1999, September. With an average of $20 a pop, his t-shirts accounted for nearly half WWF's $500 million in merchandise sold in 1998. Austin was also involved in the highest rated episode of Monday Night Raw in May 1999, specifically the main event, which the show managed an 8.1 rating, which is about 8 million viewers. The other reasons that made Austin so big was his relatability, as he allowed other people to almost live vicariously through him, and his stick it to the man attitude, whether that being his language, which was often vulgar for the time especially, including his famous promo about Jake the Snake, which launched his stardom.
316 says I just whipped your ass!
He embodied the everyman kind of anti-authority attitude, and unlike the everyday person, he was able to get back at their boss, of course being Mr. McMahon, who Austin would often humiliate, whether physically or mentally. Would wear what he wanted, drank beer, would often flip the middle finger, and would verbally dismantle his opponents and boss in a funny, creative ways. He was one of the best anti-hero figures. He wouldn't be the first full heel in wrestling history. That would go, in my opinion, to Austin Idol with his Idolmania catchphrase in Georgia, or superstar Billy Graham with his fashion and promo style. You could even argue Ric Flair. However, he was the most impactful and effective, in my opinion. He was someone that the audience was able to believe in, which was added to by the fact that the Stone Cold Steve Austin persona is very similar to the real Steve Austin.
It's really not that controversial a thing with me.
I mean, that's the thing, what you just said. I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm hearing Stone Cold in your voice as you sort of get excited by the subject. How close is Steve Austin, the guy that I met, we sat in the green room, talked about families and stuff like that, to the guy in the ring?
That's the exact same thing, except sitting here 3 feet from you, we're not in an audience, where it's 20,000 people or 60,000 people, where I'm trying to project all the way to the back of that audience.
Which only added to the fanfare and reaction to him, whether it be in his entrance, which drew genuine, pure reactions of excitement, or his matches. He was able to get the audience to feel genuine emotion, which of course is the goal of pro wrestling. However, that would change in one fell swoop, which was actually Austin's idea, which he has gone on to express his major regret for it, after being his heel turn at WrestleMania 17, which Jim Ross, head of talent relations, was firmly against the idea.
But to me, I told Steve this, that'd be like Hollywood casting John Wayne as a Nazi. This doesn't make any sense. And doing it in his home state. And doing it in the market he grew up watching wrestling from in Houston. And this didn't jive.
Now this week is one of the biggest in the history of pro wrestling, and possibly the biggest in American pro wrestling history, in which Vince McMahon, the then owner of the WWF, was able to buy WWF's biggest competitors, WCW, for around $2.5 million. A very low price considering the size of WCW, which for 83 weeks drew a bigger audience to watch their shows over WWF, which broadcasts both on Monday night, which started this hot boom period of wrestling. WWF would announce a sale on their TV on March 26, 2001, which would be the final air date of WCW Nitro, which simulcasted with WWF's show, in which the sale would be announced on the 7th angle of WCW vs WWF, aka the Invasion angle. On March 31st, WCW would air its final syndicated show, WCW Worldwide, which had aired since the mid-1970s.
And this wraps up WCW Worldwide, not just for this week, but forever and a day. WCW gone, Worldwide gone. We want to thank you for joining us each and every week here on WCW Worldwide. What a great crew we've had. It's been a lot of fun taping these shows, and you can see we have a really good time. For Mike Tenay, I'm Scott Hudson. We'll see you down the road somewhere else. Thanks for watching Worldwide.
Then, a day later, would be now considered one of the greatest pay-per-view events and cards in wrestling history, WrestleMania 17, which the match would feature three of the most important people in WWF's biggest period, those being Stone Cold Steve Austin, Vince McMahon, and The Rock. Austin would fight The Rock in the main event, which was essentially WWF's victory lap. Of course, in competitors involved being the biggest stars of the company, and an already great show which sold 1,040,000 buy rate on pay-per-view, 67,925 at the Reliant Astrodome in Houston, and a $3.5 million game. The main event throughout the weeks up to the event was built up carefully, whether it be a very well done sit-down interview with both competitors and Jim Ross, which foreshadows Stone Cold's turn to the dark side.
As much as I need to beat you.
Then both of them having a chaotic brawl just 3 days before WrestleMania, and of course the legendary My Way promo package, which perfectly built up the magnitude of the match. Now the match itself was a chaotic but great one, and very bloody one, featuring an all-time commentary team of Jim Ross and Paul Heyman, who recently joined from the defunct ECW. The crowd was also fully immersed in the match. Though due to the location of Texas, they were clearly on Austin's side, and featured two of the biggest and greatest to ever do it, in which Austin would win the match thanks to Miss McMahon, leading to Austin, as JR put it,
Stone Cold is taking hands with Satan himself!
Now before I talk about why I didn't think this worked, I'd like to play you some audio of a fan's reaction at the time I think put a lot of the issues of this succinctly.
Well, by 10:30 I said this show is great no matter what happens from here on. So it was easily the best pay-per-view I've seen since I can remember. And I think that this pay-per-view is the punctuation on this wrestling boom for the last 5-6 years. I always said that the one thing that was missing from this boom was that big stadium show. You know, when I think back of the big boom of the 80s, you know, I think to 3 or 6 or 8, and that was the one thing that was missing, and now they have this one. And I just thought it was unbelievable. I didn't like the ending. I didn't like the last 5 minutes of the show.
Really?
I would have liked to just seen them have a classic clean finish, one guy or the other, and save that turn, because it didn't work. The fans didn't care, and you got JR and Paul telling us something that doesn't really kind of mesh with what the crowd is reacting to.
Now, there are many reasons this didn't work. The biggest reason was how out of character it was for Austin, as Austin had been a bad guy in the past and then became a good guy. However, when he was a bad guy, he wasn't the corporate bad guy type, and was still anti-authority, but just much more aggressive in tone.
You're not waiting until later on the program to get my ass on TV. Because you bring me up here, you sit me back here in the green room like some jabroni and show half of a match.
One of the main draws of Austin was his anti-authority stance. It felt like a betrayal to the audience, which it was, and almost feels surreal when watching it, as previously Austin would pretend to join McMahon, only to then sucker punch him and screw him over. Which brings me back to that Terry Funk quote. Austin was someone, despite the wackiness of the Attitude Era, fans could always believe in, as Austin, the real guy, felt more similar to Stone Cold persona. This felt like the ultimate betrayal to the fans. Most fans didn't buy him being a corporate heel, as it felt like an act. Thus he struggled to really get any significant heat. Fans would boo, however, it still didn't really work. The ultimate irony of the event taking place on April Fool's Day. However, the company's popularity would wane. Now, not all thanks to Austin, as the company had other issues post-WrestleMania, Triple H getting injured, and thus they made Austin into the more comedic and cowardly heel, which totally went against what fans liked about previous incarnations of Stone Cold, leading to Austin's infamous "What" chant, which did get over. However, it's also very annoying. The Rock leaving to film Mummy Return, which did clearly hamper heel Austin, due to how big The Rock was, due to his mainstream appeal, which of course would lead to his success in Hollywood in the future. Austin has stated how he wished he had called an audible and stunned Mr. McMahon, which, as I've stated earlier, fit in line perfectly with Austin and his character. And I think a fantastic way to end one of the best pay-per-views and most pivotal weeks in WWF's history. Now, I will state, interest in pro wrestling would have no doubt to get a big hit with the closure of WCW. But millions of people stopped watching wrestling. However, WWF was arguably the height of their popularity, and I think would have been able to maintain that popularity much longer if this decision wasn't made. Of course, there are other factors such as long-term planning being bad and bad booking, however, it's still a strong factor.
The main event this week was only the 5th highest rated match on the show, behind Jericho vs. Regal, a light heavyweight 4-way, Lita vs. Molly Holly, and ENC and Rhino versus versus Eddie Guerrero and the Hardys.
The Austin match did less than all of those.
Yeah.
Well, was that? And I'm guessing there was no competition that clashed specifically with the main event.
It's not a holiday or anything like that. It is Austin as a heel is not a draw.
Wow. I mean, we've always talked about it. It's one of the big talking points in wrestling history. Austin turning heel, did that hurt business? I've never really gone into the numbers. It's quite stark.
Which we see WWE really hasn't learned from, given the failed John Cena heel run, which, similar to Austin, was shocking in the moment. However, where it led to was undercooked and a wasted opportunity. WWF/E, since this moment, have struggled to create as big a star as Austin and Rock. The most obvious person who comes close to this would be Cena, who would carry the company on his shoulders for many years. There would be others who were white hot, however, they were never able to sustain it, either due to injuries, personal issues, etc. Overall, Austin heel turn signalled a punctuation mark for wrestling's hottest period. Its most believable star, who enabled that suspension of disbelief to occur, was forever changed, which soured fans due to him being someone that fans could truly believe in. Despite the craziness and zaniness of pro wrestling, Stone Cold Steve Austin was very believable, because that was who the real Steve Austin was, just dialed up to 11, and its popularity has never fully recovered. Possibly it will never reach the heights it did during that period, never again.